Jason Downey, and he's not live
That's
streaming.
exactly
How
right.
disappointing.
So we want to thank you guys for being with us this morning. There have been some disturbing protest arrests that took place recently, and we're curious as to the cause of them, exactly why these arrests were made after 3 months, maybe?
At least.
3 months at least, and try to just figure out what the story is. So, David, whenever you're ready, just kind of give us a rundown on what we've been dealing with.
And actually, there was one arrest involved in this incident. The other 3 folks, and I'll get to that in just a second, I brought before the court voluntarily. And apparently back in, I think it was September 19th, which was 4 days before the Breonna Taylor announcement, there was an incident in the square between involving some of the protesters and I'll call them a religious group, I guess. They're called the Black Israelites. And there had been, my understanding was there had been some conflict between the protesters and the Black Israelites previously. And my observation, and this is just my observation was that these Black Israelites made it a habit or practice of coming into the square to disrupt, cause trouble, instigate, agitate, and apparently on this particular evening, because these events happen later in the day, probably I would say early evening, it was light out then of course, but there was a confrontation between the Black Israelites and some of the protesters that evening, September 19th. Allegedly some property was destroyed, there was some fighting. I wasn't there, I didn't witness it. I have now seen part of it on live stream thanks to one of our county prosecutors, and I'll get to that in just a second. About maybe a week or so ago, a protester was arrested. It's public record. Bruce Sweeney was arrested. I think it was Bruce. Bruce was arrested, and it took a while to find out what it was about, but apparently it related to that particular incident and that day. His citation indicated that there were co-defendants, which obviously tells a lawyer that there's other people involved. I went to check the files and the e-warrants, what we call electronic warrants, and sure enough, there were 3 other folks who had been identified and warrants had been sworn out against them by police. Interestingly, the warrants weren't sworn out until I believe the date is December 15th, which is right about 3 months after this incident took place. And all of the warrants were felony warrants, among other things, for assault to a second-degree assault, rioting. There might have been a few other charges, but those would be the most serious: the rioting, first degree, and the assault charges. I set about to have the other 3 folks turn themselves in rather than be arrested for a lot of different reasons. One is, in the age of COVID, you want to try to keep folks out of jail as much as possible. I had a lot of frustrations getting the cases on the docket, on the court docket, so to speak, so that I could ask a judge to convert the arrest warrants that had been issued to summons warrants. And that's a pretty common practice for lawyers. If you find out a client has an arrest warrant, you can go to the court, ask the judge, bring the person in and say, hey, this person has appeared voluntarily. The purpose of a warrant is to get someone before the court and before the criminal justice system so that the wheels of justice can turn, however slowly they may turn, but that's the purpose of a warrant. And my philosophy has always been, unless someone is a dangerous criminal and you bring them before the court, I see no reason why a judge would not convert from a summons or from an arrest warrant to a summons warrant. We finally got the cases on the docket yesterday. I guess it was yesterday morning. That would have been January 7th. And over the objection of the county attorney's office, those arrest warrants were converted to summons warrants. However, the judge said, I'm only going to do that if we do arraignment today. In the criminal process, the arraignment is really kind of the first step where the charges are read and a person enters a plea of guilty or not guilty, and the case is passed for further proceedings. In a felony case, it's passed for what's called a preliminary hearing, which is a hearing within 10 days if you're in custody, 20 days if you're out, for a court to determine if there's probable cause that a felony occurred and to send it to a grand jury. The frustrating thing yesterday was I appreciated the court converting the arrest warrants to summons warrants, but then when we got to the issue of bond, pretrial release, the court imposed on the individual who'd been charged with assault, 2 counts of assault, a $10,000 full cash bond along with HIP, a $2,500 bond on another individual who was not charged with assault, and HIP, and then another individual also not charged with assault who had a $1,000 bond and also HIP. And my problem with this is our legal system, whether it be the police, prosecutors, are, in my opinion, unfairly targeting protesters and holding protesters to different standards than they ordinarily would other folks in the criminal justice system. And in my discussions with the court yesterday, the judge indicated concerns over, first of all, that these people are a danger to the community. And I said, well, if these people are a danger to the community, this event happened on September 19th, and it was 3 months before warrants were taken. And what occurred was it was in the square. Everything that happens in the square, folks, is captured on multiple cameras. It's called RTCC, the Real-Time Crime Center. And not only are they videoing, but oftentimes, and I suspect on September 19th, I can guarantee you, given the times at that point, there was somebody actually watching the cameras and saw what happened. And individuals went over, it involved the corrections, because these individuals that were allegedly assaulted went over behind the Metro to corrections. And I mean, so the world knew what happened. The authorities, as they call themselves, knew what happened. So if these people are truly a danger to the community, why didn't law enforcement immediately act and say, oh my goodness, these people are a danger to the community, we've got to get them off the street, and act immediately? That's not what happened. Here we are, at arraignment court 3.5 months later, and here stand my folks who voluntarily surrendered themselves through me to the criminal justice system. So that should not have been a concern, in my opinion. The other problem was, of course, the judge spoke about the seriousness of the offense. And my position on bond has always been, in our Constitution is what we call the presumption of innocence, which I believe, as a lawyer and as an American, that is probably one of our paramount rights that separates us from other countries. 2 things probably separate us from other countries: the presumption of innocence, and the right to vote, which of course is under attack right now. But if the presumption, I told the court, means anything, then the seriousness of the offense is the smallest factor that should be considered in connection with a decision about bond. And if you make the seriousness of the offense the paramount concern, then the presumption of innocence really doesn't mean anything. And the court and the county attorney kept harping on, well, these are serious offenses, these are serious offenses. And the county attorney showed the judge some of the RTCC video, which I felt was inappropriate. That happened in the morning when we were just talking about converting the warrants from arrest to summons. And I said, well, we're not at trial, we're not at a probable cause hearing. I don't really care what the video shows. The charges are what the charges are. And at an arraignment decision, the seriousness of the offense should be a very small consideration. But apparently to the court, that court felt that it was a serious consideration and issued bond accordingly. The other problem I had with it, an objection I had to it, was the HIP thing was, well, the court said, well, I have to make sure these people don't reoffend. I said, well, that's why we put on bond release, conditions of release on bond. We call it N&O, it means no new offenses. So that if the person reoffends, they're on notice that if you get arrested again, your bond may and probably will be revoked. Putting someone in HIP is not going to keep them from reoffending. If you want to go out of your house and reoffend, you can go reoffend. So that's not really, that's a what do they call it, a wolf in sheep's clothing. So I felt like the bond decision was extremely unfair. Now I understand 2 of the folks are out and heading towards HIP. And I didn't ask them if it was okay to talk about them. I mean, it's public record, their names, but I think everybody in the movement knows who it was. But the 2 ladies are out. The gentleman, I understand, is not yet. And there's all kinds of problems with HIP. One of the ladies lives in Indiana. You can't have an Indiana address and do HIP. 2 of the folks live together. You can't do HIP. They can't have 2 defendants in one place. So it's just this targeting of protesters for these cases. And we were talking before, and I've seen over and over and over of, overcharging people, charging people that didn't do anything. And we were discussing some examples. I mean, and I'm biased on this, but my own daughter was arrested by LMPD on December 17th, and there's multiple camera angles. I mean, multiple camera angles from live streamers. I know Maxwell was there. And there was lots of WVS, the body cams LMPD had, and my kid didn't do anything. She was standing on the corner videoing someone else being, in my opinion, wrongfully arrested, and she was tackled by a police officer, dragged to the ground, injured, and she's charged with disorderly conduct 2 and I think unlawful assembly. So there's an example of a protester doing nothing who was arrested. I've seen multiple examples. I think I put on Facebook a couple weeks ago, there was one individual charged with obstructing governmental operations. I always have loved that one. And I think the other charge was resisting arrest and possession of marijuana. He had a marijuana cigarette, which, by the way, our county attorney now announced over a year ago, if you're arrested and the most serious charge is possession of marijuana, they won't prosecute it. So the message to the police was, don't cite people for that because we don't have time for that. Now, if you got 10 pounds of cocaine on you and marijuana, they're going to charge you with possession of marijuana. But if you get a speeding ticket and you have marijuana on you, they're not going to prosecute that anymore. But anyway, this individual was charged with those crimes, and in the plea bargain discussion, the prosecutor said to me, well, if he pleads guilty to the obstructing governmental operations, which was for shining, as she called it, a spotlight in the eyes of police, if he pleads guilty to that, I won't upcharge him to enhanced possession of marijuana. And I said, so, and he has to forfeit his lawfully owned weapon. I said, so you're shaking down my client for property, and you're threatening that if he doesn't plead guilty to a lesser offense, you're going to now charge him with a felony. And the prosecutor replied, oh, I'm not threatening anything. And I said, you just did. And I am just waiting for a preliminary hearing where someone is charged with enhanced possession of marijuana, which takes marijuana, personal use possession of marijuana, which is a Class B misdemeanor, to a Class D felony. But the statute says that the possession of the handgun or the weapon has to further the offense of possession of marijuana. And I've told the prosecutors, I said, I think the only way you could ever make that case is if the person is standing there holding their gun in one hand and their marijuana in the other and saying, if you take my marijuana, I'll shoot you. And I submit that's probably never happened. But I've got another one right now, and I told him the other day, I said, I think we're going to have a hearing on that because I want you to bring a police officer in to say that someone furthered the offense of possession of marijuana by having a handgun. It's a legal impossibility and a factual impossibility. But that's what they're doing, and the people, bond is one of the most misused prosecutorial tools in their box, and here's why. What they do is, if they have you in jail or they have you in home incarceration, your freedom is restricted, your liberty is restricted, it gives them the upper hand in plea bargaining. Because, if you're in jail, you're a lot more inclined to take some offer that they make you than if you're not. So that's why they do it. It's a misuse of the system, it's a misuse of our laws, but it goes on and on and on and on. And our folks are clearly being targeted. I mean, I've seen case after case where, these charges are just absolutely ridiculous. So that's where we are in Louisville, Kentucky, still in January of 2021, not much has changed. The attitudes of the police, in my opinion, I've been out in the street, haven't changed. I will say for Yvette Gentry, kudos for firing 2 officers that should have been fired months and months and months ago. And did I not say all along that you always have to go to where the seed is planted? And where the seeds of Breonna Taylor's death were planted were in a search warrant that, according to police themselves now, was false. Now think about that for a minute. A police officer sworn to uphold the law and the ideals of truth and honor and all that goes to one of our judges over here and gives that judge false facts, which causes that judge to sign a search warrant that led to an innocent woman's death. And it took it's longer than that, since last March.
Almost 10 months.
It took almost 10 months for the police department to take action because that planted the seed. If that police officer would have told the truth to that judge probably would have rejected that search warrant, or it sure wouldn't have been a no-knock warrant. And all of our lives would be totally different right now. So think about that, how serious that is and how life-changing that act was. That police, if that's true and that police officer lied to that judge, that police officer should be fired and should have been fired. And that police officer should go to the penitentiary. And that police officer should never serve as a law enforcement officer anywhere in this country for the rest of his life. Because that goes to the heart of our system, and the heart of our criminal justice system should be truth. And unfortunately, in this town, with this police department, not all of our police officers, but a good deal of our police officers, they don't understand that concept.
David, the Southern Poverty Law Center has designated the Black Hebrew Israelites, which is a fringe group,
Yeah,
as a hate group.
no surprise.
So it's not at all surprising that the folks who have been protesting in Louisville would not agree with the tactics that the Black Hebrew Israelites were using. And I'm wondering why they appeared at this point to be the victims in this case.
Well, it's the false narrative that's attached to this entire movement that comes from police, prosecutors, and really some of the courts I've seen have this misconception about what's going on in Louisville, Kentucky. And I'm going to give you the shining example of this is Robin Ash. Is September 17th or it was September 18th, where we had the protest out at the Attorney General's East End office in Louisville. And there were several hundred people there, nonviolent, peaceful march, punctuated and invaded by an individual who drove into the crowd brandishing a weapon. Ms. Ash responded in kind, as she is permitted to under Kentucky law. And she ends up being charged with felonies, and our county attorney, one of our assistant county attorneys, desperately attempts to have her indicted for a felony she did not commit. A police officer from LMPD charges her and tries to have her indicted for a felony she did not commit. And fortunately for Robin Ash, the legal system, for her at least, and maybe it's because of the lighter tone of her skin, that'd be my guess, the legal system worked for her. And to the credit of one assistant county attorney, I contacted him about that and I said, hey, we did a preliminary hearing on this, and the police officer admitted, reluctantly, but admitted that all of the information that he received from this alleged victim, Jim Geisler, wasn't true. That not only was it not true, but that Jim Geisler was the aggressor in this situation, threatened hundreds of people, not just protesters out there that day, but he endangered the lives of innocent people who were just in the line of traffic. Police officers. He endangered the lives of police officers because he put everybody at risk out there that day by doing that. Yet here's this campaign to smear Robin Ash, portray her as a criminal, try to have her indicted. And imagine being indicted for a felony crime that carries up to 5 years in the penitentiary. And you not only did you not do it, but you yourself are an actual victim of what happened that day. So there's the narrative from LMPD, and to make it worse, our prosecutors, you know, and in that case, I got to tell you, you know, a lot of times in the run-of-the-mill criminal case, you know, if there's a preliminary hearing on a, you know, wanton endangerment 1, in all likelihood, that prosecutor is going to meet the police officer 10 minutes before the hearing and say, what do you got for me to present? And that county attorney is going to present it and let the chips fall where they may. But in this case, this preliminary hearing occurred 3 weeks later. This was all over the news. If you remember, WDRB came out with a story that protester, you know, draws gun on innocent person, and that's the narrative LMPD came out with, and it was all untrue. And you know, it's disgusting that, you know, I have to go to a county attorney and say, hey guys, did you watch this video? Have you watched your own helicopter footage? There was great live stream footage that day from, it was Sherry Wright, I think, wasn't it? And Tara was there. And I presented, well, actually the county attorney, amazingly, the assistant county attorney herself, because she has the burden in a probable cause hearing, she presented the LMPD live footage from their helicopter and Sherry Wright's footage to this police officer, who still stuck with the narrative that Robin Ash committed a crime. I couldn't believe it. And on cross-examination, I said, I went through his citation, and, you know, I said, here's fact A. I said, I'm going to have the county attorney restart the video, and anytime you see fact A happen of Robin Ash committing a criminal act, I want you to tell her to stop. He never told her to stop, because none of it happened. And that's what is going on. And I explained to the judge yesterday with regard to our 3 protesters that were before her that, you know, the snippet of video that we saw from the RTCC, that's not the whole story of what's happened with these black Israelites. And that's not the whole story of what happened that day. And that's not the whole story about what's been happening all summer. And, you know, I'm a kind of a Jewish person, and one day I was out there and they were out there making their noise, and somebody told them I was Jewish, I guess, and they were wanting to talk to me about, and I was like, I don't want to talk to you all. You don't belong here. You know, you're not in favor of what's going on here. And I have said time and time again to people, you know, if you come into the square, if you come into a civil rights march or rally or movement, and your intent is to agitate and cause trouble and cause consternation and cause conflict, chances are you're going to get trouble and conflict. And you're getting, I'm not saying anybody deserves anything, but I'm saying if you do that, you're getting what you ask for. And that's probably what happened that day. I haven't seen all of the footage. I haven't talked to all the witnesses. But to narrowly can this, to get an indictment on somebody, and that's what's going on. And I think these people are being treated unfairly. I think when the whole story comes out, you'll see a result that the county attorney's office probably isn't counting on. But unfortunately, that's how our criminal justice system works. And, you know, I'll tell you, people, when you elect these district court judges and circuit court judges, you got to understand how much power these folks have over your life. And, you know, you got to make your decisions carefully. And I think I disagree with the bond decision. It'll be revisited at the preliminary hearings, which are scheduled for January 19th at 1 o'clock in courtroom 203. I urge everyone to watch and see our criminal justice system in action, and how these things go. But again, that's kind of where we are in Louisville, Kentucky. And I submit to you, not much has changed since late May, early June, as far as the way people of color and their allies are treated by the police and by the system.
So David, a little bit ago, and thank you for explaining everything that's been going on. A little bit ago, you were talking to us about something that you're about to start up because of all the stuff that has been going on this summer. Would you
Right.
like to talk about that? Just
Thank
a little
you.
bit?
Yeah, I would. Summer. My involvement in this movement has been probably, I think my first day of protesting was actually in St. Matthews on May 31st. I don't even know what day it
It
is.
feels,
I don't even know what day
I
it
think
is.
it's
May
Friday.
the 28th.
Well, no, I actually, my
birthday's
first
Friday.
day out was Sunday, May 31st, when Lily and I went to St. Matthews. And that's the day that I'd been to the office to make sure our office was still here because of where we are located, which, you know, I don't want my office burned down, but if my office burns down in the name of making America what it really should be, that happens. That's why I got insurance. But I came down, checked the office, things were fine. And I came home and she said, I said, hey, there's big protesting up in St. Matthews. And she said, I want to go. And I've told this story before that I said, why? And she said, because if I don't stand up for her two little black cousins, who will? And I said, well, Lily, that's the right answer. Let's go. And here I am today.
We appreciate you.
Well, thank you. And I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I've set up I think I did it in October. I actually have been in the planning stage of this. I've set up an organization. It's a 501c3. The application's in, and it's called Peace Through Justice Initiative, LLC. And one of Jason Downey's contacts has done us, this is a logo mock-up, which I think I like, and we're going to use. And the purpose of the organization is to provide as much as possible assistance to folks in the civil rights BLM movement who are falsely or fraudulently charged with crimes. My daughter being one of them. Of course, she has legal aid right where she lives. Not just fraudulently charged with crimes, but where crimes are upcharged, where someone's charged with, you know, enhanced possession of a marijuana cigarette because they had a gun on them and unlawful assembly. That's purpose number one, is to provide as much as possible legal services for those folks. And number two, to be a repository and a mouthpiece for education on what happens in the criminal justice system, not just with the police and their treatment of African American folks and their supporters, but what happens in the courts as well. And if you don't believe there's two criminal justice systems in the United States, come to court, come follow me one day when I am in Louisville courts or when I'm in Western Kentucky or, you know, wherever. And there's many studies about charging and sentencing and probation and parole and things like that that show clearly there's an imbalance between the way black people are treated and the way other people are treated, not just by police, but by the courts and sentencing and things like that. So that's the goal of our organization. I'm planning on probably an Allies March to kick this thing off. I was hoping to do it this weekend, but just ran out of time with everything else going on. Maybe I'm looking at next weekend or the week after. Next weekend is the King weekend, I think.
I know my birthday's coming up.
King's the 18th.
Yeah.
I might do it then, but I don't want to step on
powerful.
anybody's toes. Obviously, Martin Luther King's a hell of a lot more important than me and Justice in Louisville, Kentucky, but to a degree, it's all one and the same. In that, you know, the dream that Dr. King had, unfortunately, I think that was 1963.
8.
No.
No, I was 8.
When he was assassinated.
1968.
That was
I
when
was
he was
8.
assassinated, but the I Have a Dream speech was 1963, I believe. I was 3 years old, and here I am 60 years old, and has that dream been accomplished yet? In some ways, yes. In some ways, things are a lot better than they were in the my mother's from Northwest Georgia, and I spent multiple summers and Christmases and holidays. I never had a birthday in Louisville, Kentucky, because mine's around Thanksgiving. We were always at my grandparents' house. I spent a lot of my childhood in Northwest Georgia in the 1960s and 70s. And I will submit to you, things are a lot better for African American people in the United States today, particularly in the South. And I mean, Georgia is sending a black preacher and a Jew to the United States Senate. Can you believe it?
Just say it.
I don't know if God is good. I hope he is, but I can tell you,
That's pretty cool. That's pretty
the
all
folks
badass.
got out there. You know, the funny thing about this week is, while Donald Trump and his henchmen, as I call them, were screaming about fake elections and fraudulent elections that there are zero facts to support, organizers were out in Georgia getting the vote out.
Hell yeah, they
And
were.
look what happened. And you know, if you don't think, and I said this a while back, if you don't, we're out there in the square protesting, and that's wonderful and it's great, but the most important right that we have, by God, is the right to vote.
That's right.
And we proved that with getting rid of Matt Bevin last year. We proved, or 2 years ago now, we proved that in November with getting rid of a scourge in the name of Donald Trump. And we proved that in Georgia. And not only have we gotten rid of Donald Trump, hopefully, through the ballot box, it ain't over yet, but we got rid of Mitch McConnell. The most dangerous Republican in the United States, in my opinion, was Mitch McConnell. And now he is gone. At least not, he's still a U.S. Senator. And he won't resign, because if he does, Bashir would appoint his replacement, which would be a Democrat. But that shows how important the ballot box is. And I remember we were marching months ago on Broadway, and we stopped in front of the Federal Building, and they asked me to speak, and I said, you know, it's wonderful what you guys are doing out here. I support you 100%, but you've got to remember one thing. You guys got to get out and register to vote. You got to show up and vote. And I'll never forget, on November 3rd, we were in the square this past November 3rd, and I was talking to some of the young protester kids, and I was asking them, did you vote? Yes. And they were telling me, well, you know, I'd never voted before. They were 27 years old and had never voted before. And the last couple of years, especially in Kentucky, where we got rid of Bevin, and then we've gotten rid of Trump, and now we've gotten rid of Mitch McConnell, how much more important can you stress that voting is? Now, going back to the civil rights movement, in my lifetime, and you too, Tara, in our lifetimes, not you all, and most of you listening, but most black people in the United States could not vote until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Think about that. Right after the Civil War, most black people could vote, and then they ended Reconstruction, and they put in all the, you know, Jim Crow laws and all the the literacy laws at the polls. Most black folks couldn't read, so they wouldn't let them vote, and that destroyed the rights of black. That's the beginning of what caused the civil rights movement, was that black people were discriminated against, and there was racism, and they couldn't vote, and they couldn't hold certain jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And in my lifetime, most black people couldn't vote, and that's, you know, that's why I listen to people say, well, there's no racism anymore. This is just red herring, but there's no problems anymore. Do you think that you can eliminate the vestiges of something like the enslavement of an entire race of people, to the extent that those people just literally got the right to vote in my lifetime? Do you think that one generation will eliminate the things that have caused that and have come about as a result of that? That's a joke to even think that. The vestiges of slavery and racism and Jim Crow and all of those things, it will take generations to eliminate that and to allow and get black people to recover from that. It will take and I will be daisy food for years and years and years before that happens. And you know, and that's why I've got little Miss Angela Davis, I call her, out here in the streets and teaching her the lessons that my parents taught me, because it ain't me and my generation and Tara's generation that are going to fix this country. It's the lilies of the world that are going to fix this country, the 14, 15, 16-year-olds. And that's why I just laugh at people that criticize me about, you have your daughter out there protesting, and protesting's bad, and a 14-year-old shouldn't have an opinion. I'm like, are you out of your mind?
That's the problem. People
I mean,
listen to these kids.
I mean, that is, if we don't have 14-year-old kids that have opinions, we're in trouble. And that's scary. And you know, she needs to have an opinion. She needs to be respectful.
Right.
But she has every right. She's still an American. She is a minor, but she has every right to have an opinion. And if we don't give those kids opinion, and we don't teach those kids what is, I'm not even going to say what's right from wrong. I teach my kid what is right.
Period.
My kid doesn't need to. My kid will figure out on her own what's wrong, but she knows what's right. And you know, I have some female friends that were all over me for protesting, and women protesting. And I said, you do realize the reason why you get to vote is only 100 years ago. We're 100 years away from women getting the right to vote in this country.
Right.
Until 1920, women couldn't vote in the United States. And you know how women got the right to vote? It ain't because men gave it to them.
It's because we fought for it.
Because they fought, and women did, wait for it, protested. And they chained themselves to voting machines and polling places, and they smashed polling places.
My great-grandmother was one of those.
Thank you.
Hell yeah.
And
We love those women.
And I mean, other than
That'd be
voting,
great.
in my opinion, the second most critical and important American right is, other than presumption of innocence, obviously, but is the right to protest,
Yeah.
and the right to assemble, and the right to have that voice. Although I will say this, anybody listening out there, please don't call those people in Washington, D.C. protesters, because they were
No.
not protesters. They were insurrectionists, and they are anarchists. And if you are of the mindset that you're trying to claim that these people are Antifa, all I can say to you is call your doc and have them up your medication,
Man,
because you're outside your mind.
there's all kinds of new pills coming out. Get some.
I'm not gonna even go to Washington yet because I want to reflect the questions that are being asked on my 2 live streams. I'm live on Take It From Tara, live on 502 Live Streamers. Riot Heart is streaming to several platforms. Summer is up, Maxwell is up. So there are a lot of people watching right now who are gonna wanna know your opinion, as several have asked, about the appointment of Erica Shields as our new police chief. Try to remain calm. But reflect on the circumstances under which this new police chief has been selected from where she came.
All right. Good questions. And I have a law enforcement background. My degree from the University of Louisville, my bachelor's is police administration. My brother, folks, is a retired United States Capitol policeman. Think about that one for a minute. And one of his friends is dead today.
Man, for real.
Yeah,
By the people who back the blue.
damn right. By the supposed members of the supposed party of law and order, which.
Those blue eyes.
So here's my feelings about the new police chief. First of all, I was disturbed by the very process itself, in that the names of candidates were not released. And I've never heard of a search for the head of a public agency where there's this cloak of secrecy or this cloak of darkness around it. And that bothered me from jump, that happened. Secondly, after the events that have happened in Louisville, Kentucky, and I'm not just talking about since the beginning of protesting back at the end of May, I'm talking about the last 10 years, of the inherent dishonesty that's come from this police department, the inherent racism that has come from this police department. I mean, you can go from the Explorer Scout scandal, which involved the molestation of children by police officers put in charge of a scouting program that the police department attempted to cover up, obfuscate, lie about. I think we found out recently there's 750,000 documents that are missing, to stolen overtime money, to a program enacted of random stops of black motorists under the guise of reducing violent crime, which was clearly racial profiling. That one of our council persons told me he had asked the police chief to stop that on several occasions, saying it was racial profiling, and the chief refused until, as usually is something, what happens when something bad's going on, the kid, I can't even think of his name right now, but he was going to get a smoothie in his mom's car, and he got rousted by the cops, and his car was searched. Kid didn't do a damn thing, and that caused a lawsuit, which, oh, no, we better stop that now.
Right.
And then we got into protesting, where the narrative of this police department has just been dishonesty. I mean, LMPD lies when they don't have to lie. They lie when the cameras are there. They lie about basically, if not everything, most everything that's come out. So here we had an opportunity to build a bridge between, really a 3-part bridge, a bridge that the police department could walk out onto, those in the civil rights movement and black people could walk out onto, and the rest of the community could walk out onto, and maybe meet in the middle somewhere and help solve our differences. And I've said all along, I said back in September, if outside agitators would leave we in Louisville, Kentucky alone, we could probably figure this out on our own. And I still believe that. But here we had this golden opportunity to build this bridge. And I believe not only did Louisville need a black police chief, but I believe black people in Louisville, Kentucky deserved someone as chief of police, not an interim chief of police, but a permanent chief of police that looks like them. And we blew it. We blew it again. And I cannot believe, I understood there were some, what was it, 50 or 70 applications put in or nominations, and I understand like half of them were African Americans. You can't tell me somewhere in the United States there's not a police administrator, African American, who was not qualified to lead this police department. And then Chief Shields came from Atlanta, and the end of her tenure was ugly, at the least. That she resigned after the shooting of the gentleman at the Wendy's down there. And again, my family is from Northwest Georgia. I have a lot of relatives in Atlanta, and I know Atlanta pretty well, and I spent a lot of time growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, and I know the attitudes down there. And this lady left the police department there immediately after that happened. She resigned, and the comments she made just bothered me because she said they needed some change and reform, and she didn't feel like she was the person to do that. Well, if we got a person who doesn't feel like they're the person to be involved in change and reform, what the hell are we bringing them to Louisville, Kentucky for? Because if there was ever a police department that needed reform and change and restructuring and modification, I don't know. It's got to be this one. So I think we had a wonderful opportunity. And by the way, I think she resigned not because she didn't want to be involved in the reform or whatever. My opinion is she resigned because, and there's some information that this is valid, she was objecting to the officers that were involved in that shooting being immediately fired, and they were prosecuted. And it always amazes me is how come in Atlanta or Minneapolis these horrible things happen with law enforcement and folks are fired and prosecuted and charged immediately. And in Louisville, Kentucky, nothing. And we have to appoint the Attorney General to do nothing. We could have done that ourselves. We didn't need the Attorney General to fuck this up. I mean, we could have fucked it up in Louisville ourselves. And it's maddening and frustrating that we've had so many opportunities, and this mayor, who I consider an abject failure, has had so many opportunities to do things, and they just haven't come to pass. When Yvette Gentry became the acting chief, there was a women's march, a black women's march that weekend. And I said it would mean so much to the black women of this community if Yvette showed up and said, you know what, I'm going to walk with you. I'm going to stand with you shoulder to shoulder, and I'm going to march with you. And she didn't. And then, the attitudes and the activities of the police department, did they really change that much under Yvette Gentry? Nah.
I do want to present for your consideration the fact that the interim chief, did make the decision to fire 2 more of the officers.
I said a while ago, I give her kudos for that.
Right.
But it's too little too late. Those guys should have been fired. Conrad should have fired him. And, but our tax dollars continue to pay them while they did nothing, I guess. And to me, it's just, I put a thing up the other day on Facebook about I'm not black and I can't feel the pain of black people. I cannot even imagine how Breonna Taylor's mom feels to see these people that were responsible. I don't care if you call it murder or whatever, but you got to concede that investigation there's a term in the military, it's clusterfuck, and that was a massive one. They also call it a snafu, situation normal, all fucked up. I mean, it was a disaster from the get-go, and her mother has to look at these guys. Nothing happened to them, nothing. Now they got fired last week, so what? You think that helps her? I don't think it does. It wouldn't help me if it were my child. And under Yvette Gentry, my child, who's standing up for her black friends and cousins, although they tell me now Lily's probably black. I don't know. Last time I looked at her, she still had that funky looking blonde hair. But, you know, under this chief, under Yvette Gentry, that happens. How can that happen? How, you know, and the funny thing about that day was, Maxwell, you were there. If you read the narrative, I read the narrative on the citation given to my daughter, and it's like this mob of protesters is endangering police. There was no one out there that night. I got out there about 6:15ish. I mean, it was cold. It was December 17th on Ali between 6th and 7th. I didn't see any citizens at all. I saw a couple of people come out of WDRB with cameras. They interviewed some folks. Then the police had to roll up, and once again, their solution for protesters blocking the street, that no traffic was going down, was to block the street. Go figure. And yet we have yet another police riot over nothing. And now the police are going to get lawsuits, and they already got one. Yes.
Talk to us about what it's like for you as a white male representing an enormous number of black protesters, and whether you feel that has been well received. There has been criticism of you in some circumstances, and especially criticism coming from LMPD and the courts that we have heard about. But have you felt that you have been welcomed as a representative of the protesters for the black community?
Welcomed by whom?
The black community.
I think for the most part I have. I mean, if you're not getting criticism and hate mail and stuff like that, you probably aren't doing your job.
That part.
You know, and I did get some criticism early on, not much lately, but early on I got some from some black lawyers. And, you know, my response to them is, hey, if you want to come out here and do the things I've done, and I'm not asking for any praise or thanks, but I've done what I've done, and I've walked, I don't know how many miles marching, hundreds probably. I've not just represented these people, but I've been here with them, been there with them, and supported them, and, you know, been there to help them and reach my hand out to pick them up off the ground. And anybody who wants to, you know, what's that movie? Jack Nicholson says, you know, pick up a rifle and stand a post. Come on down.
A few good men.
Yeah, do what I've done. I mean, if you want to criticize me, I don't care. But if you really want to put your money where your mouth is, folks, come on down. And there are many African American lawyers that have helped out in the movement. I'm not saying that. I'm just speaking to the ones that criticized, and other lawyers that criticize me. Come on down. We're glad to have you. You know, and there's several lawyers that I've asked in the community. I'm not going to identify them. And I said, can you pick up a couple of cases? And they're like, not unless I get paid.
Well, that was the next question. How much money have you made representing the protesters?
Zero. Not only have I made zero, but I've lost a few other clients that I'm sure I've lost because of that. I've spent, I don't know how many hours dealing with this, and fee-wise, I've not charged anybody a fee.
502 live streamers don't get paid either,
I know.
so you're in good company.
Yeah, I know.
Yes.
And I mean, I'm not, you know, I'm lucky and fortunate. I'm a hell of a lot luckier than a lot of people and more fortunate than a lot of people. You know, I did have one thing going for me growing up. I wasn't very smart, but I had this color skin. And my dad was a U of L professor, and I got into U of L's law school with a police administration degree. I mean, come on. The football players were police administration in our program, so it wasn't that hard. Not to knock football players, a lot of them are really smart, but a lot of them were just skating. And at the time, I really wanted to be a policeman, but I've been very fortunate that I have been able to make a decent living for myself and my family, and I'm not hurting for money. And, you know, I never even, when I started doing this, I mean, I never thought about, well, if I do this, I'm not going to make this amount of money. That didn't enter my mind. I thought, this is something that I need to do, and it's right. So, no, I haven't made a nickel. And I've got a lot of criticism from people saying, you know, you're just in this for the money and all this, and
It's not.
and that you're working for Soros, and I'm gonna tell you something. I keep telling. Is his first name George? Is it George?
I think it is. I'm waiting on my check.
My
too.
check, brother. I mean, come
Come
on.
on.
My last name is Mour. I mean, where's my $1 million check that I've
Have you
been
got your check?
hearing that I've gotten? Yeah, have any of the live streamers gotten their check from Oprah or?
No.
I
Still
mean, I
waiting.
thought at least Oprah would give me a car.
I
mean,
sent them to my P.O. box, but still not.
it's crazy. So,
Pay my cell phone bill. Pay
Yeah,
for my
something.
data.
Please, that,
Yeah.
the data, that would be great.
and you know what? I'll
Just
tell you
the
this
data.
too. Not only have I not made any money off this, but I was trying to figure out the other day how much money I've spent.
Oh, Jesus.
Not that and I'm not complaining. I'm just saying to those of you that say that I've made all this money doing this, I bet I have spent $10,000 since May, maybe more, of my own money helping people.
And I'm not paying you back either.
Me neither.
I mean, I'm
He's
just trying to
helping me
think
out,
of a
thank
few
God.
things I've done. I've bought God knows how many waters and groceries for the square to feed,
Right.
not just feed protesters, but feed the homeless.
And you
I-
represent us on a spot of a dime. All we have to do
Well, I
is like,
do,
hey.
and I mean, I went a
Way.
couple weeks ago. I've lost a lot of weight in the last year, probably about 35 or 40 pounds, and I've got a ton of clothes that don't fit anymore. And I bagged them all up, and I took them to the square. I went down to the homeless camps, and there's some homeless dudes wearing some Austin Reed blazers right now. I can tell you. I mean, I'm fine with that. And I mean, it's just my parents taught me a certain code, and my parents were not religious people, but they were spirit. My mother was spiritual, and she said, you know, she taught us the golden rule: do unto others. And my father summarized it as don't be an asshole, which I took that to mean what it did. And, you know, I'll never get this money back, and I don't care because I helped people. I did what I thought was the right thing, and I've said all along, someday I think when I'm Daisy Food, I'll be sitting in front of my parents, and they're going to say, what did you do in the civil rights movement of 2020? Did you...
You did the right thing.
And I think they're going to say, not only did I do the right thing myself, but I believe that the way I've raised all my children, but in particular this younger one, that I've planted a seed in her that she will do greater things than I ever could dream of doing.
Lily's amazing.
And that's, to me, that's the greatest gift that I could have given to the civil rights movement, not
Yes.
just my time and the things that I've done, but a child who will become an adult who hopefully will educate herself. It's a struggle every day with that kid, but who will educate herself. And, you know, she and I have talked about maybe being a civil rights lawyer or maybe an organizer. She's big into her basketball now, as you all have been doing the live. She plays tomorrow at 6 and 9 and I'll live stream when she's in the game.
Cool, yeah, you live stream it.
And unfortunately, right now we can't. Only 2 people are allowed in the games, and when we can have fans in the games, I want to have 1,000 protesters
we will
cheering
be
for
watching
Lily.
it. You know we love
And I'm
we
sure
love
we'll-
Lily.
I'm sure AAU will love that, but you know, and I'm going to keep doing what I do. I'm not going to stop. That's why I've set up this 501c3, and the money part of that, I don't need a nickel, and I don't want a nickel for what I've done, but I'm paying paralegals and filing fees and you know, a lot. And I have 2 folks that have one person's already donated. Several others have indicated a desire to. I envision. I know State Shell has the Hope Bus, and at some point I'd like to have the Justice Bus.
We have the Love Bus. We do outreach
Yeah,
on that.
because
too.
I think I'd like to do some outreach,
Buses
and
are awesome.
I've got a lot of plans for it. And you know, every day, I don't think a day passes if I don't have either a protester case in the courts or something going on. And you know, if I have a day where there's nothing going on, I feel almost lost.
Yeah.
I feel.
We're all there with you.
I know, and I at home at night. I've been doing a lot of writing, and I'm into music, as you all know, and I'm gonna do a recording of some songs about the movement, things like that, and I'm writing a book And whatever money we make off that, if any, would go to the 501c3 to fund the 501c3.
What's the name of your 501c3 again?
It's Peace Through, THRU Justice Initiative, LLC. And I've asked, I want a board that, I've asked a couple of the live streamers, because I think, as I've told you all before, without the live streamers, this movement would not be where it is, because the best thing that you all have done is expose truth and show truth in this movement. And some of the mainstream media have been along for that ride, but a lot in the mainstream media have not. And you know, any television station who says, you know, we don't really believe WDRB, the stuff we print, I got no use for.
That part.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been wanting to ask you about, David, and I know this
Is
has
whether
been a
I dye
discussion-
my hair.
No.
I
This has
don't.
been
I
a
don't.
I'm gonna get him to
discussion-
dye his hair.
I don't.
This has been a discussion for a very long time, and that is, how can television stations, which I have challenged them already to do, be forced to monitor their online comments from particularly the far right? Because the hate speech that is being evidenced on their platforms, not only on their websites, but on their Facebook pages,
It's incredible.
is not being monitored by A, the stations, or B, the platforms, which seems ridiculous since, you know, Riot Heart just got banned for 30 days for reposting a news story. I got a community violation for saying praise and worship is happening at the square. There's this constant inconsistency in social media enforcement of the guidelines. So how can we challenge the mainstream media stations to monitor the commentary that's coming in on their pages?
I don't know. I mean, one way that I always challenge people is to sue them, because no one likes to be sued, but I'm not sure that's actionable. Are they responsible for the content of commentary on their platforms? I haven't looked at the law. I don't know. I would think there'd be some degree of responsibility there. And you know, it's funny, we were talking before we went live. There's a, you know, I monitor Facebook a lot, and there's one of these web Facebook groups. It's called Bullitt County Politics and Beyond. All right, and there was a comment made by the Commonwealth Attorney out there a couple of days ago about what happened Wednesday in Washington. All right, and that was posted, it says 1 day ago, and it says, while I condemn the action of today's protesters, I can't help but laugh at the politicians and members of the media who are hyperventilating and clutching their pearls over this, yet had nothing but glowing praise for the mostly peaceful Antifa and BLM riots. And you know what kills me about that? First of all, the one thing that's true about that is there weren't Antifa or BLM riots. There were protests. And it's true, most of them were peaceful, nonviolent protests. About 98% of the time, if those nonviolent and peaceful protests lapsed into some sort of violence, it was police riots. It was police-induced violence and brutality that caused confrontation. And we saw it here in Louisville, Kentucky the first weekend. We've seen it for months and months and months where police act aggressively towards nonviolent protesters. We saw it on December 17th at 6 of Muhammad Ali in a peaceful nonviolent protest. But here's what's really disturbing about this. If you page down on this site, this Commonwealth's attorney, an elected official, is on a site where this comment is made. And I'll identify this guy because it's on Facebook. This individual's name, not the Commonwealth attorney, the individual who made this comment is a Daryl Napper, okay? And here's what he says. The time has come, patriots. Every single Democrat is an enemy of the Republic. It doesn't matter if they are your friends, family members, or even your children. They are enemy combatants now. Treat them as such. We are officially at war, 1776. Now, if that doesn't scare the shit out of every single American sitting here right now, and to make matters worse, an elected official, a prosecutor, the chief law enforcement officer in that county is a member of that page and is posting on that page. That bothers me.
It's amazing because most corporations, news outlets are adamant about the fact that you can't post your personal opinions about anything when you're a journalist. A lot of major corporations prevent you from doing things that you want to do on Facebook. So my question is, how can an elected official be allowed to post
I got
something
into
like
it
that?
with the Commonwealth's attorney for, I can't remember what circuit it is, but it encompasses Breckinridge County, Grayson County, and Meade County, over some posts that were made before a march back in, gosh, June or July in Litchfield. And he, in my opinion, he was basically extolling people to come out and suggesting, you know, that if these people do any violence, you know, they'll be arrested. And I said, well, what about the 2A, the Second Amendment people that come out? If they extol violence, are you going to arrest them? I mean, there were no threats of that. And I asked him to take the comment down, and as I recall, I think he did. But it bothers me that we've got law enforcement officers, public officials, and I saw a story somewhere today that someone has done a study and identified hundreds of law enforcement officers across the country in multiple states that are members of these hate groups, and it does not surprise me at all. I contend that well, I'll say it this way, it's my opinion, based on some things that have happened, that there are members, I'm not talking about the staff and the commanders, but there are members of LMPD who, if they are not members of these groups, one or more of these groups, they are certainly sympathizers. And the biggest proof that I'll give you of that is the snipers that were yanked off the roof by LMPD back in the night after Tyler Girth was shot. Not only were those individuals not charged, they were given a ride by LMPD from the Hyatt Hotel garage to Preston and Broadway, which is, you know, a mile and a half or so. And I submit to you, if the police that night would have found black men on the roof of a hotel parking garage with sniper weapons, would they have given them a ride somewhere and not charged them? No, they'd have probably been calling for body bags because they'd have killed them. So the dichotomy between the way black protesters and white militia, whatever you want to call them, are treated in this country, it's just unbelievable. I mean, I talked to my brother over the last few days about how in the hell did those people in Washington breach the United States Capitol? I said, I swear to God, I was up there for the March on Washington. If a bunch of black folks and their allies would have tried that, they'd have been shot down on the steps. And my brother agreed 100%. He said, oh, unbelievable.
There are a number of published photos of certain Capitol police officers taking selfies with the rioters.
Giving them water, taking
Letting them in,
selfies,
moving the
letting,
gates, let 'em in.
letting them in.
Yeah, I've seen a video of
Yeah.
one waving them in.
Yeah, they were. I got
They-
that last night.
and he agrees with me. Any police officer that failed to take appropriate action against those people, which would have been arresting them, should be fired, because it's conduct unbecoming a police officer. It's probably a violation of all kinds of other policy. But the Capitol Police, I mean, I went up there years ago to help somebody with a disciplinary case up there. It was 10 or 15 years ago. Represented one of their officers in a disciplinary case. There's a lot of politics up there. There's a lot of, and by the way, the U.S. Capitol Police, there's a little bit of a misconception about Trump having control over them. The United States Capitol Police they work directly for Congress.
Yep.
They are not the D.C. police. The D.C. police work for the mayor of Washington, D.C., who's Muriel Bowser right now. The U.S. Capitol Police work for Congress. They patrol Capitol Hill, the Capitol, the office buildings, the Senate side, the House side, and all the related buildings. They go over to Union Station. So Donald Trump didn't tell the Capitol Police to stand down, but somebody did.
No, but the Capitol Police Chief and the Sergeant
Well,
of
they've
Arms of
they're
the House
gone.
have now resigned
And they
because
should
of
have.
the inadequacy of their preparation.
Well, because
He delayed the process of some stuff.
They could have
I'm
killed
sure.
all of Congress.
Yeah, they could.
literally
They
could have
had
killed all
a-
of Congress.
there's
They
a
had
picture-
backpacks,
There's some
they had
people that
Molotovs.
dropped
there's a
bombs.
photograph of a gallows they had set
There
up.
was.
There was.
It was at the staging site and everything.
I mean, how in the world that happened, and I mean, there'll be questions about that for years to come, but that damaged our democracy and our country. That damage is irreparable and will not change in my lifetime, will not go away in my lifetime. And, you know, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, but, you know, Republicans, whoever, if you supported Donald Trump, you own part of that, because the Republican Party sold its soul in 2016 to Donald Trump. And don't get me wrong, I was not a fan of Hillary Clinton, I'm not that big a fan of Biden. Biden's part of the war on drugs and why why black people have a lot more problems than they would have if that hadn't happened. But I would have voted for Bozo the Clown over Donald Trump. I mean, and to say I'm surprised by Wednesday, I'm not. I've said for months that he ain't leaving. He's going to declare fraud if he loses. And I said scarier than Trump winning is Trump losing. And it's not over yet. And now our supposed vice president won't even return calls of leadership about invoking the 25th Amendment, and that the leadership of both sides. And anybody who says McConnell was a hero for standing up and doing what he did the other day, he's not a hero. He did that to CYA. He did that because he realized the jig was finally up, and in order to cover himself, he did that for his own political survival. McConnell didn't do that because he's a good American or he loves America. In my opinion,
for the same reason.
He was the most dangerous Republican in the history of the United States, and I stand by that. And
would you comment on what happened in Louisville the night that these insurrection activities took place in D.C.? There was a caravan protest by the Louisville protest community, into which someone purportedly representing the Trump side drove into the caravan at high speed and almost injured people who are either marching or caravanning. Can you comment any about that incident, David?
I wasn't there. I saw what happened, and I've said all along, one of my concerns, if y'all remember, when I sued LMPD back in August when they came out with their, I think they called them the rules of engagement, no more marching in the street, and I sued them to shut that down and did, and I talked to them about it. And they were like, well, you can march in the street, but no vehicles, accompanying the caravan or the walkers. And I said, that's not going to happen, because at some point in Louisville, Kentucky, one of two things is going to happen. Either somebody's going to drive by and shoot at the protesters, either in the square or marching, which has happened, numerous times, or someone is going to drive through the caravan of people and kill people. As in Charlottesville or other places where it's occurred.
And attempts have tried.
It has happened here, and they've tried, and it ain't over yet, and it's probably going to happen. And if you try to drive at people and kill them with a vehicle, whatever happens after that, in my opinion, is at least. But whatever happens in reaction to that is viable self-defense and defense of others.
So a comment was just made by Jason's mom, actually.
Hi, Jason's mom.
The guy who was in front of Mitch's house that you guys live streamed last week, I saw him on a live stream at the entrance of the Capitol when they were breaking in, screaming about Mitch.
Oh.
He's a known QAnon conspiracy theorist.
The guy with the beard?
Yes.
Yeah, his name was Damon Beckley, I believe.
Yes. I'm not surprised if he's... my brother told me today, he said it was in the news. He lives in North Baltimore, and he said there's a guy up there. It was on the news yesterday with his work shirt on, with his company's name, and his name, talking about how he was in the rotunda, and they fired him.
Yeah, another guy had his work badge on. He got fired too.
These people amaze me that...
Privilege.
I mean, what were they thinking? That's it. That's what I was going to say. How in the world can they think nothing's going to happen to me if I do this? Because we're white and we're privileged and we can get away with this. Hopefully this time they're not going to get away with it, and there's good facial recognition that'll identify most of these folks. And the guy that they're claiming was Antifa, the guy with the stupid looking horn thing on. They already know who he is.
QAnon, yes.
Yeah, they already know who that. His name is Jake. Is it Jake? Whatever. And hopefully he goes to prison for the rest of his life. And in my opinion, anybody that went in the Capitol that took part in that should go to prison for a very, very long time.
I don't understand why mass arrests were not made yesterday. I mean, we've been able to do it in Louisville. We've had a mass march.
I mean, 87 black people sit on the lawn of Daniel Cameron and are peaceably arrested.
Right.
And I don't know how many people were in the Capitol the other day, but it looked like hundreds.
I mean, think about it, you guys, though. Like, seriously, they did all that, but they put a whole staging site to hang people. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Gallows.
So like
Gallows.
this is way past anything that you know what I mean. Like they're and it's not gonna
Not to say
last
we all
long.
can't agree. There's some in Congress that need to go, but not that
Yes,
way.
yes.
I mean,
I'll also point out the
There's
fact
a
that
difference
one of the
between-
big lies that the president told in his very, very stilted second speech was that
that's a lie.
the National Guard was put out. That was absolutely not true. He told them he was gonna walk with them, got back in his car and went to the White House. And the vice president, in actuality, had to call the Pentagon to ask for National Guard
Right.
assistance to say that they were in danger.
Right. Well,
Think about that.
Muriel Bowser, the mayor of D.C., called the Pentagon and said, "We need the National Guard out. We need help," and they delayed it. The scary part, though,
There
is
was a video of them did y'all see that where they were in the video watching everything that was happening while music and stuff
Yeah.
was playing and they were dancing? That video came, Trump and them and his family.
But here's what's really frightening
Just saying.
to me is, and I believe that the people in the civil rights movement are probably targets of these nut jobs, but there are so many people out there, many of whom are educated and are sophisticated, and they believe that the election was stolen, and almost in every single state, and their auditors and their election folks say it's not true. It's just not true. The leaders in Congress say it's not true.
The judges say it's
The
not
ju-
true.
Ideology,
70
though.
judges, 80 judges have said it never happened.
Yeah.
And yet these people still believe it happened. They will claim that all these folks in the Capitol were Antifa. You know, they don't. I ask people, "He's Antifa," and I say, "Do you even know what Antifa is?"
Right.
And I'll ask them this: true or false? There is an organization in the United States called Antifa. Oh, well, I don't know. Well, the answer to that question is no.
Which has now been labeled domestic terrorists by our current president.
Right. Antifa is a political ideology made up of that many groups share. They disagree on how to do things. Some advocate peaceful means, some advocate not so peaceful means. But there is no one group called Antifa in the United States.
And it stands for anti-fascist.
Right. And
And
my
who
dad
would
was
not
an
be?
anti-fascist.
Right.
My father served in the United States Navy at the tail end of World War II, claimed he defeated the Japanese self-handedly, but who knows. And so my dad is Antifa, and I'm proud of him for what he did. He served his country. He was a 18-year-old high school kid who joined the Navy to fight what? Fascism. All good Americans should be anti-fascist, and we should get rid of the worst fascist we've seen in my lifetime, the one that sits in the White House still right now.
Well,
And
my question is still, and I've been asking for 4 years, why the 25th Amendment has not been invoked. And secondly, how quickly Congress can act to impeach. Because I believe, just from a standpoint of a political scientist, that this cannot go unanswered, and that his actions in inciting this riot yesterday must have consequences. So from a legal standpoint, David, what can be done, and I'm not asking you to be a constitutional lawyer, but what can be done at this point?
I got a B in constitutional
That's pretty
law.
good. Common
Gotta
law's
be.
pretty
Gotta be.
good. What can be done about the president's actions that actually incited, led, he was directing, they were answering, they were following his directions, they believed what he did, all of the components there.
Well, here's what I think about that, and I'm going to digress for just 1 second because I'm going to say again, every single Republican or whomever that supported this guy is complicit in this. They enabled this guy. They allowed the Republican Party as we once knew it, which I didn't like to begin with, but not like I don't like it now. But and I'll just give you, they sold their soul, their party, to the devil in the form of Donald Trump. And they were stupid about it. And the stupidest one of all is our Vice President, Mike Pence, who said yesterday, he said, "I can't believe Donald Trump, is treating me this way." I mean,
You don't want to be his friend no more.
Mike
so yeah.
Pence never heard the story of the scorpion. You
Exactly.
know the story of the scorpion?
Right.
The scorpion and the turtle.
The turtle's in the river, and the scorpion's standing on the bank, and the scorpion says, "Hey, give me a ride across the river." And the turtle says, "No, you'll sting me." And the scorpion says, "No, I won't." And the turtle says, "Yeah, I think you will." And the scorpion says, "I promise I won't." So turtle pulls up, lets the scorpion on his back. They're halfway across the river, and he stings him. And the turtle says, "What'd you do that for? Now we're both going to drown." And he says, "I'm a scorpion."
It's in my nature.
What did
Right.
Mike Pence expect? After all the things I've done for him, when you don't do what he wants you to do,
He wants to be a dictator.
He hates you.
Yep.
You're no good anymore. He will
destroys
trash you. He will try to destroy you. Mike Pence will get everything he deserves. He's not a hero. He enabled this guy.
Yep.
He allowed this to go on, as did McConnell, as did Cruz. What's that little rat from Missouri? What's his
Lindsey
name?
Graham, Josh Hawley.
Oh, Lindsey Graham. Josh, I like Lindsey Graham a lot more when he's drunk on the floor of the Senate than when he's not. And I suspect, I bet if you'd have given him a breathalyzer on Wednesday, he was
toasty.
He was 3 sheets. Looked like it to me. Maybe not, but it looked like it to me. But what do we do about Trump? Well, when I
Can
was,
he pardon himself?
you know,
He's
when I
trying.
was 14 years old, I had been at my cousin's house in California in August, and I came home and the TV was on, and Richard Nixon was resigning, and Gerald Ford, who was never elected by the American people to president or vice president, became president. Gerald Ford, I think, was a decent man. I didn't like his politics. But one of the first things he did when he became president was he pardoned Richard Nixon, which may have cost him the 1976 election to the most honest man we ever elected as president, Jimmy Carter, who we then threw out 4 years later in favor of racist, lying Ronald Reagan, okay? I was okay with the pardon of Gerald Ford, or of Nixon by Gerald Ford.
It was for the good of the country.
It was for the good of the country, and our country needed to heal.
Yes.
This time, I'm in favor of prosecuting Donald Trump to the letter of the law, putting him in prison if possible,
He will
for the good of the country, because we need to send a message to politicians, to Americans. We need to send a message to the outside world, to our enemies, that we as Americans, we will not tolerate this. We will not support this. We will not let this happen. Now, the question comes, if I were Donald Trump, what would I do right now? I'd pardon the hell out of myself. The question is, can a sitting president pardon himself? I don't know the answer to that. My gut reaction to that is, I don't think he can. I think the president can pardon others for their crimes and misdemeanors. I don't think our framers, and I haven't looked at it closely, but I think if you looked at what the framers wrote and what they said in constitutional law over the years, I don't think they intended that a president could commit high crimes and then pardon himself. And
He could resign, have Mike Pence become president, and pardon him, have him pardon him.
well, if Mikey Pence has any huevos, any stones, he will tell Donnie Trump to go F himself when Donnie resigns and asks him to pardon him, because I would remind Mikey, if I were one of his aides, remember all the shit that he said about you after you stood up for the Constitution, finally, on, I guess it was over the weekend. And I mean, the most alarming thing of all is, you know, the phone call that was recorded
Yeah.
with the Georgia Secretary of State. I mean, if that's not,
Terrifying.
I mean, he
If
paid
that's
a whole
not
porn
criminal-
star off during his whole
Yeah,
thing.
I mean,
So
if-
I mean, like we've got a laundry list.
if that's
of
not a
reasons why
criminal
Trump should
act,
be gone.
I don't know what to tell you. And then, you know, he literally stood out there the other day and
Incited
baited
a
these
riot.
people, incited a riot. And it wasn't just, it's not like, you know, somebody said, well, Antifa occupied the Senate offices over, not Merrick Garland, who's the Kavanaugh, wasn't he the fraternity boy
Right,
that got in
Kavanaugh.
trouble? All right. So they occupied offices. There's a big difference between occupying a Senate office building and breaching the walls
Right.
of the United States Capitol, doing thousands of, it's probably millions of dollars of damage, because they destroyed the inaugural stage, which I'm sure is in the millions of dollars. They assaulted members of the party of Law and Order and Back the Blue, assaulted federal police officers
And killed one.
and killed one.
Guess blue lives don't really matter.
Killed
do they?
one. So much for Blue Lives Matter, so much for making America great. So that, you know, that's what happened. These people breached our Capitol, threatened our government, and they found pipe. I believe they've reported they found pipe bombs. There were obviously guns carried in there. I mean, my God, what? I mean, that's
zip ties. There was a
Zip
couple
ties.
zip
of
ties.
them
What were
with-
they going to do with the zip
Cocktails.
ties?
The speculation is they were gonna take hostages.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
they
gonna
wanted
take.
to. The speculation was they wanted to get Pelosi, Pence, and somebody else,
Yeah,
and hang them
Schumer.
and kill Schumer.
I
yes.
really, really do hope the guy that was here last week in front of McConnell's house, The guy with the beard. What?
David Beckley.
I hope he was in there. I really
Well,
do.
he's the one that they just said they saw on the live stream in
In
the Capitol.
in the Capitol.
Mhm.
Good. I hope he goes.
One more
Yeah.
quick thing, somebody just said Trump just threw out another dog whistle by saying he wouldn't be at the inauguration.
Yeah, I heard that this
Him
morning.
letting his people know he won't be there and to give them free run to do what they
Yep.
want.
Right. Right.
David, you have given us more than an hour of your time, and we haven't done this in months. We keep saying we're going to talk tomorrow because we love to approach a broad range of topics with you, and you always give us a lot of well thought out answers. We appreciate you, and we've got to let you go. Now this says live bombs at both the RNC and the DNC headquarters. I don't know where that's coming from, Julie. Can you quote a source, please? I don't know whether that was yesterday or if that's.
I heard on Wednesday they found live
There was like 6 bombs or
either
something
bombs or
like
bomb
that.
making material at the RNC and the DNC in
Yeah.
DC.
We appreciate you, and thank you for your work and your
Peace.
service. And please be safe out there, David, and everybody else. Thank you so much for being with Summer, Maxwell, Rideheart, and me today. We appreciate your support of 5
One last thing to all of those that called me a hippie. No haircut yet, and I'm not getting one until Mayor Fisher's out of office.
Oh,
At least
shit.
you're not as gray as I am. Thanks, David.
You might have some long hair before it's over with.
Grecian.
Thanks, David.
You're welcome.
We appreciate you, David.
All right.
The people's.
Kate, did we get there?
And we are live with Attorney David Mour.
I didn't get any.
I'm still alive. Just so How much hate did we get there, Riot?
Nothing. I got nothing.
That's because the haters are all hiding out from the feds where they've been